I'm very delighted to have Larry Sloan come and talk to us today. Larry is the current CEO of the American Industrial Hygiene Association. And for those of you who do not know, it's the Association of Scientists and Professional Industrial Hygienists who are committed to preserving, protecting workers' health in workplaces and having safe workplaces. Prior to this, Larry was the CEO, the Society of Chemical Manufacturers and Affiliates, or SOCMA. He is a former board member of the National Association of Manufacturers Council of Manufacturing Association, where he served as the chairman till 2012. He began his career as a chemical engineer at Air Products, later worked at Nalco Chemical Engineering in a variety of roles, marketing, manufacturing, sales, and so on. He graduated magna cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania with a BS in chemical engineering. Later, he returned to the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern, where he got an MBA. I've known Larry for many years now. We have sought each other's counsel and advice. Just earlier today, we have been talking about all the latest stuff. And I said, maybe he should talk about some of that too. And he said, yeah, he was planning to anyways. Also, I think his original reason, was to come talk to us about the various ventures AIHA has launched recently to improve the practice of industrial hygiene. And I would say, we have rejuvenated the profession quite a bit. And so I'm looking forward to your presentation. So with that, very briefly.
Sir. All right. So I put this presentation together a few weeks ago under a prior president. And I thought, oh, this is good. I'm going to, give an overview of AIHA and all the great things that we're doing and talk to you a little bit about the strategy of industrial hygiene risk assessments and cover some fundamentals. And I'm going to do all of that. But before I get into all of it, I want to talk just a little bit about what's been happening over the last couple of weeks. So I do quite a bit of traveling, as many of you know. I travel around the country and I visit with local sections. We call the chapters or sections under AIHA, and we've got about 60 of them around the country, and I try to hit around a dozen of them each year, and then I do some virtual presentations, and you guys are local, so it's easy to come up here. And I was out in California earlier in January and hit a couple sections there, and then there was the inauguration thing that happened on the 20th, and things started to kind of unwind from there. And I went from California to Montreal, believe it or not, of all places. Some very nice weather to some very unnice weather. And the meeting in Montreal was a group of STEM society CEOs. And this is an umbrella organization that's called CES. And most of you wouldn't know anything about this because it's in the association world where I live. But CES stands for the Council for Engineering and Scientific Society Executives, CESSE. So anyway, when I became the CEO of AIHA in 2017, I didn't know about CES. And so I heard about it and joined up and been going to their CEO meetings once a year. And the meetings are good for us CEOs to exchange best practices and how do we manage difficult boards. Not that we have a difficult board. How do we manage members that are difficult? Not that we have difficult members and stuff like that. So the meetings have been kind of mundane. Well, this year obviously was an exception. And so the meeting started the last weekend. So Saturday, January 23rd, 4th, that weekend. And that's when the DEI executive order had dropped. And then the next day, the order on the research grants dropped, which they then rescinded. So you can imagine, here we are, we have our meeting agenda all set up, and I was sitting on a panel talking about something that has nothing to do with any of these executive orders, something very mundane. And the entire agenda for our meeting got shaken up because of these executive orders. And the level of anxiety in the room across 80 of us CEOs was palpable, right? I mean, I talk a lot about emotional intelligence. When I came up here, 5 years ago, right before the pandemic, I actually talked about EI to the grad students, and I've gotten into EI because I think it's a very important subset of knowledge for us to be able to master when we're navigating our lives at work, at home. And EI is still very important, probably more important than ever. But I feel and I felt the level of anxiety because I mentioned to Ram this morning, a lot of our sister associations in the scientific space are doing a lot of federal grant work. There were associations in the room whose budgets were 40, 50, 60% based on federal grant money. That's a huge amount of money that was subject to being taken away. And fortunately, AIHA is not anywhere in that position. We're a very fiscally healthy organization. We've got more than 100% of our operating budget in the bank, which is great. The benchmark is to have at least 6 months. We have over 100% of our budget. Our budget is about $17.5 million a year in revenue. And we're in a very, very healthy place, and we intend to stay that way. So I wasn't worried so much about, the federal grant pullback, although then the next day, of course, they rescinded it. But then I started thinking about the grants, and I started thinking about the nature of grants and the fact that AIHA never had a federal grant until 2020. And because of the pandemic, we had started to push out this information on how do you get businesses to safely reopen in the face of a raging pandemic, because at the time, under the first Trump administration, there wasn't really a lot of clear guidance. And so we had been working with NIOSH on the side very quietly to suggest some protocols, some policies, some recommendations that follow the hierarchy of control, right? What are the engineering controls that should be implemented in a business to better protect workers? And at the time, air exchanges per hour, air change rates, and UV disinfection, and all that stuff wasn't really in the vernacular. So we were pushing out a lot of information on how to help smaller sized businesses that didn't have the benefit of an in-house industrial hygienist to better protect their workers. So as a result of all of this effort, NIOSH lobbied for us to get a multi-year CDC grant. So flash forward to today, we're in year 5 of this very nice grant, which has garnered us about $800,000 over 5 years. So that's not an insignificant amount of money. Most of those funds have gone to third-party contractors that are actually doing the work to put together the collateral assets, the little video vignettes and the brochures and the flyers and an ebook that we created. And so all these things have been created over the last several years. And because it's a federal grant, all of this information, like a lot of the other things that AIHA produces, is completely free. It's for the public domain. And so we created this portal called committocare.org. So it's commit to care, C-A-R-E.org. So I'm flying back from Montreal, and I'm on my little plane, which, by the way, flew into National 5 hours before the plane crash. And I got all these text messages on my phone the next morning saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "What's going on?" Because I'd gone to bed early. And then I heard about the crash. So I'm like, okay, it wasn't my time yet. So there's all this going on. And then I started thinking about the grant. I'm like, okay, it's not a DEI grant, because a lot of the grants that are out there that STEM societies are working on are DEI specific, right? They're doing some specific study that's targeted at a particular disadvantaged population. And these are all very, in my opinion, very worthy projects. Well, now these projects, these grants are all subject to cancellation, to pullback. Our grants that we have, including the one with the CDC, is not like that. It's a scientific grant that is helping to further awareness about how do you protect your workers in the event of any airborne transmitted disease. So it doesn't have to be COVID. It could be just the common cold, the flu, RSV, monkeypox. Apparently there's a TB outbreak in Kansas City, which is where our conference is going to be this year. So there's that. So I started thinking, well, this isn't really going to affect us because we're not really doing any DEI work, and we're not really bringing in a lot of money in the grant anymore. We only get like $80,000 for the current fiscal year. But then I thought, except the word CARE is an acronym, and CARE stands for community, I think it's accountability, responsibility, and equity. So now we have to go through and we have to look at all of the materials that we produced over the last 4 years. And theoretically, we have to remove the word equity. Now, I wouldn't call AIHA on the kind of the, crosshairs of the government. I don't think that we're front and center like some of the other much larger organizations are out there. I mean, there's some, 30, 40, $50 million nonprofits that I think are a little more visible. But on the other hand, I don't want to get the association in trouble. So now the task before us is to, and I went back and forth over the weekend with the folks that are involved in the grant, what are we going to do about the word equity and how do we pivot? So we've decided, I think we're going to change out the word equity for engagement, but that's fine. Now we have to spend all the time and the money, if you will, to change out. And can we even change out, in the videos and all the collateral pieces? That's easy. But it's an interruption, right? It's something that we did not expect to have to worry about 2 weeks ago, right? So now the energy and the collective force behind this grant has to take a step back, and we have to focus on this request, not even a request, this mandate from the federal government. And so I'm irritated, quite frankly. I'm pissed off, for lack of a better expression. And I'm very, very annoyed that there is not more of a counter resistance to all of this. But be that as it may, I'm not in a position to do anything about it other than to comply to the best of our ability. And so that is one challenge that is facing AIHA in a microcosm, is the word equity. Yes.
I was thinking about this in terms of, to my read of it was no new activities. Not, you have to go fix everything.
So
I was some order that was issued 2 weeks ago.
yeah, and so I would say that AIHA is in a much more favorable position with respect to that, because none of the work that AIHA has done, not in at least 9 years that I've been around, is focused on the D, the E, the I. Now, we do have a DEI policy. We spent some time developing this policy. We ran it through the membership for comment. It is on our webpage under our policy listings. I don't have any intention of removing it. Now, if the board says differently at the end of this month, we can remove it. But I've already signaled to our president and president-elect that I don't think it's wise to take it down. So far, they agree with me, but at the end of the day, it's the board's decision. I mean, I'm the hired guy, right? I mean, I personally don't think it's a big deal. If we want to rename it, there's a lot of articles that are out there on how you can kind of whitewash what you're doing with DEI and rename it different things. Honestly, I think the government would be onto something like that, but we could certainly rename it something a little less innocuous. But I'm not worried about all the other stuff that we've done. Now, we have a minority special interest group. Is that not allowed? We have a pride special interest group that we created a few years ago. Is that not allowed? We don't know where this is going to go, but I don't feel that it's prudent for the association to gut react and start taking down policies and removing special interest groups just because. If we're in the very unlikely situation that we get a letter saying, we notice that you have this and this and this, then I'll have to take that back to the board and then we'll have to take appropriate action. But I'm not overly worried about it because we're not a, and this is going to come out the wrong way, we're not a DEI focused organization. Yes, the research that we're doing is to benefit all demographic slices of the community because there are workers across all demographic segments, and the communities that we reflect represent all slices of the demographic community. But nothing that we're doing is signaling that we're specifically doing a study on a particularly disadvantaged community, unlike a lot of these other societies that are out there doing that kind of work. And so I don't know what they're going to do. So we're not as disrupted as others, but we're disrupted in these very specific ways. So my point in telling you,
Videos, you have to change it.
the videos, we need to take a look at those videos. These are little 2-minute videos that came out under the grant where it's basically the do's and don'ts of how to put on a respirator and how to take it off. But if the video shows that the word care has the word equity as part of the acronym, we're going to have to take that out. So we're going to have to go into those 7 or 8 videos, and we're going to have to go into all the flyers. I'm not worried about the printed stuff, and probably change the word E. Yes.
Even if you're not basically funded by the government, are most of your funds?
Well,
Grant?
the Commit to Care stuff did get funded by the CDC. So because all of the products that I'm talking about for Commit to Care directly came from this grant, we would. Now, the other stuff that we've created, I'm not so worried about. The white papers and all the other guidance documents, we don't really, I mean, we have a social concerns and as I'm talking to you guys, I'm starting to think about what else do we have. But I haven't even really been, I'm just starting to process this because I just got back from Montreal literally like 3 days ago, and I'm still, thinking about all this. There may be some other things that we eventually need to look at. I will say, suffice to say, for those of you that are AIHA members, I don't want you to worry about any of this. I mean, that's my job. And I'm not overly worried about it. I'm more annoyed right now than worried about it. But the board will be having a conversation at the end of the month about, like, what are the ramifications for all of this from a DEI perspective. Now, going back to the grant executive order, which got rescinded the day after it was announced, I'm not so sure part of that's not going to get put out again. In other words, I think there's going to be a little bit of this back and forth. And we only have 2 federal grants. We only have the Commit to Care, which is the CDC grant. And it's probably going to end this fall because it'll be 5 years, and it was a 5-year grant. And I don't think it's going to get extended. And then we have a very small Department of Transportation grant, which comes through our relationship with an organization called TransCare, which is part of the American Chemistry Council, which you're a part of. And the Department of Transportation grant is basically a development of an online module that's going to help train first responders in utilizing what are called emergency response planning guideline values. And so if there's, God forbid, if there's a derailment or a chemical plant explosion in Baltimore and a high volume chemical escapes, what do you tell the community? Do you shelter in place? Do you evacuate? So the ERPGs are basically occupational exposure level limits for the community. So they're different than the OELs for the workplace, right? So you all know about OELs. So AIHA is really the only organization that develops these OELs for the community. EPA used to assist in this effort, but they got defunded and they stopped doing it back in 2013. So AIHA continues to develop these values. There's only about 160 of them for high volume chemicals. And so we continue to do this very important work. And so we thought through TransCare, American Chemistry Council, this would be a really great educational tool to make sure that first responders understand what ERPGs are, why were they created? They came out of the Bhopal incident in 1984. How are they utilized? And what do you do with them? So that's the little bit of grant money we get through TransCare under the ACC.
I need a new name.
I'm sure that's not what you do.
ERPG doesn't have DEI in it. It's a different E. E stands for emergency.
Trans.
Oh, well, that's their job. TransCare's under the American Chemistry Council. That's funny, but it's not funny. Very clever. So that's, yes, sir.
So does this change what AIHA is going to publish in like the Synergist or like any journals? Like, will you kind of like not
No.
allow things to be published that would historically be allowed?
I mean, okay, first of all, Synergist, are we going to publish an article in Synergist that talks about all the great things we're doing in the DEI space? No. I mean, we had an article, and I think it was a president's column a couple years ago when we formed the Pride SIG, right? And group members got together and said, we feel there's a need for a Pride SIG. And there's probably a few dozen folks and their supporters that are part of the SIG. And I think we had a little snippet in the Synergist. So yeah, so we probably wouldn't publish anything in the Synergist about a special interest group like that for the time being. But we're still doing outreach to academics, and whether the academics are historically Black colleges and universities or not, that's just part of our pipeline development. So I don't see any issue with Synergist in terms of the types of articles. And as far as JOEH goes, which is everybody should know is a peer review journal, those studies that are being published there really are not DEI related. They're more about exposure to different types of hazards, whether it's excessive noise or heat or silica or other types of chemicals, Chrome 6, things like that. And remember, the articles in the JOEH are coming from around the world. So they're not just US. So Mike Larinaga is our editor-in-chief. I haven't had a conversation with him yet about any of this, but I don't suspect that the quality or the caliber of the articles that appears in the JOEH is going to change, quite frankly. Now, if we were an association, again, that was doing a lot of, DEI-specific research and then publishing that, that would be a problem.
Yeah, but there's still like groups of occupational workers that would be considered like DEI, like ag workers. Like, are you going to have to change the language around publications on that, or like any kind of like?
I don't think. Look, we have a heat stress app. The heat stress app right now is designed for outdoor workers. Outdoor workers include ag workers. Ag workers are predominantly what? Latino or Black. It's a DEI group, but the app is not for DEI. The app is for any outdoor worker. And so I'll go to my grave and say, I'm not gonna pull the app. I mean, the app is for all workers. As a matter of fact, we're developing a version 2 of the app for all workers, both outdoor and indoor, and that'll release later on this spring. That's just a technical tool. That's not a tool that's specific to a demographic slice. So I guess my point here is that, and it's all still kind of murky in my head, but we're not developing any research or putting out any products or fostering any specific education that's specific only to a particular slice of the community, if you will. So that's why I'm not worried about any of this. Again, I'm more annoyed about the rework we might have to do on that commit to care thing, but other than that. Now, the other thing that I'll mention that's kind of a ramification of all of this is, you know, our fellow IH colleagues that work for NIOSH are in a lockdown mode right now. You know, they cannot communicate with us. And as I was talking to Ram earlier, our conference is coming up in May, and typically we attract about 3,000 in person and about 1,000 online. It's about 4,000 folks total. And now we're worried and concerned about those NIOSH workers that won't be able to speak, let alone attend the conference. So there are a handful of sessions that are strictly being presented by NIOSH personnel. And so we need to figure out how do we unwind those sessions and schedule things in their place. So we have a lot of that kind of homework that we have to do. Chris?
Deanne online was asking if there's any issues that are being raised with language translation.
That came up at the CES meeting about, well, is language translation considered DEI if I translate something into Spanish? I would argue no, and we're going to continue to do that. You know, everything that we publish these days, for the most part, is translated. All of the materials that come under the Commit to Care or the CDC grant, everything is translated into Spanish at the very least. And there's some other publications that we've been translating into Portuguese. That's being done by the Brazilian organization. I can't stop what the Brazilian organization is doing. If they want to translate something into Portuguese for their members, I don't consider that to be a DEI focus. So yes, there's a lot of gray here and there's a lot of ambiguity. And I know that scientists don't like ambiguity. I don't like ambiguity, but I'm really not overly concerned about any of this. Now, we get through our board meeting at the end of February and I come back here, I might have a little bit of a different story. I don't think I will. I think that we're all in the same mindset to kind of take our time and kind of parse through this. And I also think we're going to get further clarity in the coming months as things sort of settle down a little bit, at least I hope. So suffice it all to say, I wanted to kind of start with all this because I don't want you to think that AIHA is in trouble, because we're not in trouble. We're not on any hit list or anything like that. We're not significantly impacted by any of these executive orders. It's just more of like a flea, like a fruit fly that's kind of buzzing around your face and it won't go away. That's kind of the way I look at it. Any questions about executive orders, federal government? I think we're going to see a lot of activity at the state level. And so we're going to be ramping up our state affairs in the coming year because that's where we're going to see a lot of activity. All right, one more thing really quickly and then I'll get to you. There's also, and I mentioned to Ram, found out about it on Friday, apparently one of our fellow representatives here in Maryland has proposed a bill to abolish OSHA. And so several of our members have emailed me saying, what is happening with this? Are you on top of this? And the answer is we're just digging into it now. And that's going to be an issue for not just AIHA, but ASSP and the National Safety Council and a whole bunch of other associations to stand up and to fight. I don't think that's going to go anywhere, quite frankly, but the fact that it's out there is something else that we have to worry about. We do have a communications piece that we're finalizing on behalf of about a dozen OHS organizations. And I like this piece because it talks about why worker health and safety is so important. Why is public health so important? Because it's good business. And yes, we care about saving people's lives, but we're positioning it in terms of business and sustainability and global competitiveness. And I think that the administration should be able to wrap their heads around that concept. If they can't accept the saving people's lives, we're going to come at it from a business perspective. So anyway, yes.
Yes, so the HHS, we'll call it gag order, was through Feb 1. Are there any NIOSH people who are key players for you in work product otherwise, who are currently under, what are some of the more notable ones? And if we can take this offline, but what are some of the more notable impacts of the gag order on your ability to produce stuff that we all need. And if that's too long,
No, I can comment a couple things. So the first thing is total worker health, which is a NIOSH initiative, and AIHA is a partner to NIOSH under the Total Worker Health Program. For those, does anybody not know what total worker health is? Has everybody heard of total worker health? Super, good. They're doing a good job marketing it. So it's a very holistic, it's worker health and well-being, and we have an advisory group, and we've developed a lot of materials that translates the principles of total worker health into terms that the occupational and industrial hygienist can understand in the workplace, and how do they talk about total worker health, and how do they interface with other types of professionals like OC docs and OC nurses and HR and operations and engineering folks. There may be a little bit of a hiccup because we have some NIOSH folks that have been serving on the Total Worker Health Advisory Group as a kind of as a liaison. And so as we roll out some additional guidance, there may be a little bit of a hiccup there, but not too much, because most of the people in that advisory group are non-NIOSH. And then the other areas, Taylor Shockey, who's with NIOSH, is involved in our big data initiative, which is under our content portfolio advisory group. So for those of you that are not aware, when our committees have project ideas, like we want to create a new white paper on something, or we want to publish a guidance document, everything goes to this advisory group called CPAG. Sounds like a pirate, right? CPAG. Arr. CPAG stands for the Content Portfolio Advisory Group, CPAG. And they evaluate all of the proposals against a series of criteria, and then they say yay or nay, and most of the time they say yay, and then it goes to our board, and the board rubber stamps it, and then it gets approved, and then the work can get started. So we have what are called content priorities within AIHA. It's a very, very systematic, logical process. So total worker health is one of our content priorities. So if a volunteer group or a committee has an idea and it aligns with total worker health, it gets evaluated against that particular priority. It doesn't have to check all of the 4 priorities. Well, another priority is big data and sensors. And Taylor has been very involved in developing what's called a standardized data collection form. So as you're in the field and you're collecting data in the field, right, there's a form and a methodology that she's been leading an effort on creating. And that has to do with how we analyze data that may not be clean, right? You might have quantitative data and qualitative data and variable data, and how do you make sense of all this? And so she has been leading that effort, so there might be a little bit of a hiccup on that, but I think a lot of that work is mostly done, but I don't know where the status of it is. So there's that. Other than that, I don't really think so. I mean, NIOSH folks are dialed into a lot of our other advisory groups and task forces, but we have enough non-NIOSH people to kind of fill the gap.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about that. I'm more concerned really about the quality, not the quality of our conference, but just the interruptions to the fact that a lot of the sessions, and it's not like there's dozens and dozens of sessions, but there's probably 12 to 15 that have NIOSH staff that are involved. And these are really good sessions. And so we're probably going to have to do some pivoting on those. And I had suggested to Ron, well, maybe we could have the NIOSH people like pre-record and then we could air the recording at the conference. At this point, that's not even allowed. So we're going to have to figure out another way around it. Maybe things will loosen up between now and May. We don't know yet. So there really isn't that much for me to do in my job these days because all these things will work themselves out, right? So these are all problems that did not exist 2 weeks ago. And that's amazing because now we have all these things that are clouding our plates that we didn't think we were going to have to worry about. We have to take these things very seriously, and we will, along with all the other great things that we're doing. So I'm going to pivot from the not so pleasant news, because that stuff's not really fun to talk about, to the good stuff, the stuff that AIHA has been doing over the last several years that I'm very, very proud of. And I'm going to whip through. How much time do I have total for this? It's 12:45.
1:15 is good.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to, and you're going to get copies of all the slides. And if anybody has any questions about anything that I've covered, including the executive order stuff, something isn't clear, you have further questions, just email me directly. All right. I always do respond to my emails as quickly as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and advance here. Okay. So I just put this slide in here because this is kind of the heart and soul of how AIHA approaches the strategy of doing occupational exposure risk assessments. And I'm sure everybody, if you're not familiar with this, this is what's embedded in the strategies book that AIHA has put out. now for the last 15 or some odd years. We are updating to the 5th edition, but this is really the heart and soul of how we approach risk assessments. And I put this slide up here because one of the things that we are doing with EPA, let's pivot over to another federal agency, is, the EPA under TSCA is starting to do their own, ramping up their own risk assessments, as we know. And we've talked to ACC about this ad nauseum. And they're doing their own values, they're called ECHLs, E-C-E-L, which is like an OEL. And the ECHLs, the limits are sometimes 10 to 100 times lower than the published OELs, like the TLVs or the PELs that are out there. So we're trying to understand how they're coming away with these lower values that are very, very restricted, that sometimes the labs cannot even analyze to because the levels are below the non-detect, and to influence how they're conducting their risk assessments. And so we're starting to have conversations with EPA staff around this concept of, I don't know where the pointer is. I don't want to mess it. Oops, I knew that was going to happen. Anyway, that on the screen. We want to make sure that the TSCA folks, as they're going about their jobs, understand the way that the industrial hygienist would approach doing a risk assessment. And the conversations have gone very, very well. We literally just started last fall. And we have an EPA task force that was formed about 1.5 years ago. And Andy Mayer, who is now with a consulting firm called Integral Consulting, he is one of our main liaison points between AIHA and the EPA. And I have gone to several EPA meetings as well. So I just put this slide up here to show and remind everybody, this is kind of the heart and soul. This is the mantra behind what it is that we do. Somebody have their hand raised?
Dan Anna down at.
Dan Anna. Yes, sir. Or does he not?
Is
that a cursor?
Is that my mouse?
Cursor.
Oh, it is. All right. Dan does not have a question. Dan's going to try to trip me up, though, so he might have a question later on. He'll probably text me. What are you saying? Okay. So I wanted to talk about that. And just as a reminder, again, and I didn't know what the nature of the group here was. Some of you may not be industrial hygienists, but I think everybody in this room in the IH space? Anybody not in the IH space? You like public health? but not-
Occupational health,
Occupational.
more broadly.
Little broader. All right, well, then this might be of interest then. The rest of you can take a snooze for a few minutes. So, we talk about OEHS, and OEHS is a little bit of a mouthful. We decided about 7 years ago, and it just started at AIHA, and like, they've never heard of what an IH is. Does anybody really know what an IH is? A lot of academic programs have changed their name to occupational health or environmental health, Bloomberg School. So we did some focus group work back in 2017, 2018, and we came away with this concept of occupational and environmental health and safety. So if you see us communicating to the outside world, you'll see this acronym OEHS, and that's why we did it, because we're trying to signal to the outside world that yes, internally we're still industrial hygienists, but occupational and environmental health and safety makes a little more sense to somebody who's not on the inside. So that's what OEHS means. Okay? Does that make sense? So it's kind of a branding thing. And so, we talk about the fundamentals of OEHS, what is the ultimate goal? So obviously it's all about protecting people at work, making sure they return home as healthy and safe as they came to work that day. But it's also about the business. And again, that harkens back to that communications piece that we're working on that we'll be presenting to the Trump administration next month or this month, that explains why we're so important and why OSHA cannot be eliminated, if you will. And obviously our vision is to eliminate all workplace injury and illness, which is a very lofty goal, but that's what visions are supposed to be. And then we talk about the different types of health hazards. And again, this should be a review for a lot of you. On the left-hand side, these are some of the more commonly recognized hazards in the workplace, right? So we've got chemical hazards like asbestos. We have physical hazard like repetitive motion. We have radioactive hazards. We have biological hazards like COVID. That's a biological hazard. And then we have other physical hazards like noise, and I didn't even put on here thermal stress is another one that should be on here because high temperatures can create health hazards. And then you can see the route of entry for the specific hazard and what the potential ramifications are in the human body. And so obviously, when we look at all of these different types of hazards, You could be a generalist as an IH professional and you could, do work in all of these different areas, or you could be an expert in a particular segment of IH. There are folks within the AIHA membership that all they do is radioactive, ionizing, non-ionizing radiation. That is their space. And there are others that just do noise. So the beauty of being an industrial hygienist in public health space is that you can kind of craft your career, and you can be more of a generalist, or you can be much more of a specialist in a particular domain. And I think that makes this particular profession very attractive and very interesting and very malleable, because you can modify yourself and you can become skilled, in different areas as you make your way through your career. And so I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on these slides. This just goes through the ARAC. That's the acronym. You first anticipate, right, the hazards that are in the workplace. You recognize what those hazards are for the toxicity of the particular chemicals, or whether there's high noise or high thermal stress temperatures in the workplace. And then you evaluate, right? You evaluate through a series of measurements. And there's a lot of work that we've done, and Ram's been involved in a lot of this work. And what do you do with the quantitative data that you are getting from the field? How do you analyze that data so you know what control category to put your workers under? So you have this range of data. Let's say you have a set of data on, well, it could be decibel levels of noise, for example, and they're all over the place. And you're conducting these samples over an 8-hour shift. You look at the peaks and the valleys. What is the 95th percentile of that data to make sure that that 95th percentile is below the OEL? And what do you do if it's close to the OEL, if it's at the OEL, if it's above the OEL? So there are these control categories, and all of this is specified in the guidance that AIHA has published over the years. And so we just want to make sure that as a practicing industrial hygienist, you understand what the process is, because there are a lot of steps. But if you follow the process, we feel that you'll do a better job of protecting workers, as opposed to, I have one data point, everybody's fine. Don't just necessarily wing it. And some of our more seasoned industrial hygienists feel that they don't need to rely on some of these tools. And we say, there's no harm in checking out these tools and using the tools. And then, of course, the control strategy is the hierarchy. And everybody's familiar with the hierarchy of controls. There is a hierarchy of controls for total worker health as well, which is similar to this. But again, top of the controls is to eliminate out the hazard, followed by replacing it with something less hazardous, all the way down to PPE. Okay. And obviously, we want to make sure we know which controls are the most effective. And we want to do things like conduct periodic risk assessments in the field, conduct training to make sure that the workers and their supervisors understand how to protect their workers, make sure that they know what a safety data sheet is in case there's a problem. Medical surveillance, depending upon how close you are to the OEL in that particular workspace, and making sure everything is documented. So these are the things that all of you are aware of in your studies. And then obviously how you communicate out to people in management that don't understand any of this. So you have to simplify the message to the senior managers that think that what you do is a waste of time. And I'm being a little bit facetious in saying that, but we need to make sure that we're communicating very clearly to management that what we do is vitally important, and we're not just a line item on the budget. Okay. And then this lovely eye chart is kind of bringing it all together, where you start in the upper left-hand corner and then you run through the process, right? You first identify what are the tasks that somebody is doing at a particular job site. How many people are in those working groups, those similarly exposed groups, right? SEGs. What are the hazards that are associated with those particular jobs? And then you run your way through the flow chart. So all of this information is freely available to all of you. And I think it's just, again, a great roadmap as you're navigating your way through your careers. Okay. All right. Any questions on any of the kind of background information? Does this all make sense for the most part? Should be very familiar. And then I always like to put up this slide. Again, this presentation is kind of designed for lots of different audiences. Sometimes I actually speak to undergraduate students that are like, they're just studying basic OHS, so they're not IHs. You guys are much more advanced than that. But I explain that, there are job opportunities all over the place. Well, I put some government agencies up here. There are still jobs in these government agencies, but you could be a consultant. You can work for, obviously, for-profit sector, academicians, universities, testing labs, lots of opportunities. And I think with the consulting route, one of the advantages in being a consultant is you get a lot of exposure very, very quickly. And then a lot of folks start out as a consultant for a couple of years and then they make their way into a particular company. All right. All right. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes talking about how great AIHA is. And then we'll have a little bit of Q&A and we'll wrap up. So those of you may not be familiar with the innards of AIHA. It is a relatively complex organization, which I like. It's not just the 7,000 national members, plus our local chapters around the country. There are limited liability corporations that are a very important part of what we do as an organization. We have a lab accreditation program that's been around since 1974. That accredits the IH labs, and beryllium labs, and microbiome labs, and other types of labs around the country. And there's probably 300 and some odd labs that we accredit. We have a proficiency analytical testing program called PAT. When I first got to AIHA, everyone's talking about PAT. I'm like, who's PAT? She's busy. PAT is a program, not a person. PAT basically approves the testing. It demonstrates that the lab is competent in what it's doing. And so every lab in the PAT program has to go through a series of tests throughout the year. And we send actual test kits to the lab, and then they have to report back their findings, and they get scored. If you are an accredited lab, you have to go through proficiency testing. That's one of the elements of being an accredited lab. So the two programs feed together. And then we have a registry program. We have 3 registries right now. One is called an asbestos analyst registry. So somebody who's competent in counting the number of fibers, right, on a filter. We have a safety data sheet registry program if you're a safety data sheet author or label writer. This is a little niche, sort of like a certification. It's not a certification like the CIH or the CSP. It's like in between a certificate and a certification. And you get your name on a registry list. And so it's got a little more panache than just getting a certificate. And then we have the exposure decision analysis registry. So I talked earlier about using statistics, right, in analyzing your data. We have an online course, which is completely free. And once you take the course, you can sit for the EDA registry exam, and then you can get yourself registered. I went through it because Dr. John Mulhausen, former AIHA president, the godfather of all things statistics, I like to call him. When he was president, he said to me, Larry, you're a chemie. I want you to go through my training. I want you to take the EDA exam and see if you can pass it. So I'm like, I'll take that bet. So I studied and passed the exam, and I'm an EDA registered person, all free. Okay? So those are the registry programs. And then we have 2 foundations. I talked earlier about the ERPG, the Emergency Response Planning Guideline Values. That's under the Guideline Foundation, right? And then all the standards work that we do. We don't develop standards, but we have representatives that serve on other associations' standards committees, okay? So that's all under the Guideline Foundation. And then we have the AIHA Foundation. Has anybody benefited from a scholarship from the AIHA Foundation? 1 person. Great. 2 people.
That's what I was gonna say. Maybe not here, but
Yeah.
every year we recommend some of our master students to the foundation, and for most years, we got at least 1.
Good. Each year we try to give out around $120,000 to $150,000. It typically will benefit several dozen students. They could be undergraduate or graduate. So if you're interested, it's something you might want to consider. Okay. And then in the lower left-hand corner, we have the journal, JOEHS, Journal for Occupational Environmental Health. That's a peer-reviewed journal. That's a joint venture between ACGIH, our sister organization, and us. And then we have something called the Product Stewardship Society, which is a whole separate organization of product stewards. These are people that have that cradle to grave responsibility for typically chemical products, but also for articles. And they have their own conference, their own membership and everything. There's about 1,000 of those folks. So AIHA overall is a very, very vibrant, very busy organization. And every day is a whole different ballgame. It's a lot of fun. So that's the organization of AIHA, and then a little bit about us. So again, we look at all of the members of AIHA, the mothership, and then all of the local sections or chapters around the country, because you can still be a member of a chapter, but not be a member of national. And I don't like that, but that's the way it is right now, so I'm not going to change it. But about 8,500 all in when you add up everybody between all the sections and the national members. And we've been around since 1939. And so we have this value proposition statement, which is something that we're weaving into that communications piece. And you can see in this value proposition statement, it's really about the business, right? You're safeguarding workers, but you're protecting the interests of the business. So very, very important. I'm not going to spend much time on these next few slides. We did an analysis about 5 years ago to make sure that everybody in the board and the membership understood how AIHA is very unique from all the other societies that are out there, because there are a lot of organizations that some of you may belong to, right? You all have different types of interests. Some of you might be members of ASSP. Some of you might be members of HFES, which is the Ergonomics Society. If you're in that space, maybe you're part of Health Physics. You know, there's a lot of niche organizations that are out there in addition to AIHA. We feel like we're kind of like the umbrella. So we did an analysis of what makes us unique, what makes us special. And we often, talk about this when we're promoting membership to folks that don't, know anything about who we are. So the advocacy work that we do, of course, the LLCs that I mentioned earlier, the community-based exposure limits, all of the professional development to maintain your credentials is obviously, this is a great place to get it. We do a lot of career development work. We have something called IH Pro Pathways, which we're going to be updating this year. It maps your career from student to emeritus. So as you make your way through your career, there are different skills that you should be considering to acquire as you work your way through, whether they're technical skills, supervisory skills, if you want to manage people, and leadership skills, where you would actually give back and you might step up and be a chair or of a volunteer group, or get involved in your local section, serve as an ad hoc member on a task force, for example. My message to you is that I don't want anyone to be afraid that, oh my God, I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to be married to AIHA for the rest of my life. You can dial in as much or as little as you want. You can serve as a peer reviewer on one publication and get that extra experience to help you. You could help write a guidance document. You could be one of the authors of a guidance document. You can give a paper at a conference. You can do something within your local section. There are a myriad of opportunities in how you can get involved within the organization at whatever level you want. And micro-volunteering is very, very important these days for all associations, because nobody has time to be in this queue where you have to, go through these 5 steps before you get to the position. You can dial in and dial out as much or as little as you want. And then we do a lot of scanning of the profession, right? We call it foresight leadership. That's where the content priorities come from. A lot of background studies are being done to make sure we understand what are the trends that are impacting the profession. AI is a big thing right now, right? We've got a group of volunteers that are working on an AI paper. I guarantee by the time the AI paper is published this summer, it's going to be outdated. Yeah. So, I mean, there are things that we're working on that are evergreen, but it's important to do something, right? We have to start somewhere. So I always joke around that some of these volunteer groups are working on things. By the time they get their act together and publish it, it's time to update it again. But we have a process in which certain documents are updated more frequently than others, and the board is very aware of those documents that are a little more time sensitive than others. So the system works quite well. This is the IH Pro Pathway. So this talks about some of the tools that we have to help you. We have a lot of outreach tools. If anybody here in the area, if you go out into your communities, or if you're not from this area, wherever you live, and you talk to students in high school about the career, and how great it is, and how you can make a wonderful profession out of it, we have tools. We have these comic books. We have games. You bring a dosimeter into the classroom and let them play around with it and see how loud they can get. There's a lot of great things that you can do. We are going to be developing some more kind of prescriptive lessons, so we can give you guys like ideas on things and activities that you can do when you address, elementary school kids or middle school age kids or high school age kids. So you can dial up or down what the lesson plan is if you go to a general science class. Okay, everybody here have jobs when they get out? Does anybody need a job when you get out of school? I assume some of you do need jobs. There are opportunities. We have the career page called Career Advantage, and we have an amazing network. And so if anybody here is struggling to find a job, drop me a line. I will connect you. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people in a lot of different places, and we encourage employers to post their ads on the Career Center. A lot of them do, and a lot of them don't. And sometimes they do, and then they get snapped up within like a month. And also, if you need an internship, internships are all posted for free, so we don't charge the company to promote an internship, but they don't last very long. So I would ask you to refer back to our career page to see if there are internships that might benefit you, if not a full-time job. Okay. And then this IMIH is something that I just want to say is also we're doing a lot of retooling this year. We've got a whole new marketing team. We're going to get away from the IH. We're going to call it something else because we've been talking about OEHS and getting away to the outside world of not calling ourselves IH. So I think we need to be a little bit more consistent in what our messaging is. So all of the grassroots outreach is going to be rebranded over the course of the next year. And you'll see that in all of the communications that roll out. All of this was supposed to be done in 20 and 21. And then we had the pandemic. And so we took a major step back to focus on the pandemic, which was good for us. But now we're coming back to the work that we wanted to do like 3 and 4 years ago. So that's why we're a little bit slow.
Vicky Tay is a graduate.
Hmm?
Vicky Tay is a graduate of this.
Mm-hmm. I do want to mention, and Ram knows this, we have an academic portal. It was developed by one of our advisory groups that was made up of academics, which did not include Ram, but we pulled together a bunch of free resources on topics that you may not have time to learn in school. I know Hopkins has an amazing program, and you guys learn as much as you can in the short amount of time you're here, but we've developed a listing of like 8 or 9 different topics. For example, there's an intro to toxicology. I don't know how much time you guys spend on toxicology here, but if you want an intro to it, there's a course online that you can get. There's a course on silica exposure that was developed under an OSHA grant that is posted here for free. There's a module on biosafety that's available through APSA International. So we've gotten access to free training from a variety of schools and other organizations that we put on this portal. And most of it, if not all of it, for the students is free. So faculty members and students, poke around a little bit on the portal, the URL's on the bottom of the page, and see if there's anything that you would be interested in. Sometimes professors will assign extra credit or an independent study if you pursue one of these things. All of that training I mentioned about an hour ago on the use of statistics and how you use statistics to analyze your data sets, that's one of the free tools that's on this page as well. So it's all baked in here. And I want to thank the academics for the foresight to create this page, and we keep adding to it. So if there's a topic that you feel should be added to this page, let us know, and we will work with our contacts to see if we can get some free material added to this page that references that particular. All right, who here is, I'm going to ask the question, who's a student member of AIHA? Shame everybody. All right, not bad. All right, so if you're not a student member, you know, the first year is only $16, you know, it's like 2 Starbucks, right? It's not a lot of money. And I seriously, I do encourage you to join AIHA because it really is an amazing. Why did you join AIHA? Let me stop talking. You remember.
I'm doing my degree.
Okay. You obviously think it's going to help you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great way to be able to network and take not only the experiences of other people, but my own experiences.
Perfect. That's why it's the network. It's connecting with people virtually, in person. It's volunteering to do something, and you meet people through that volunteer opportunity, and you never know where that's going to take you. And I will tell you that all of the younger folks that I come across over the last 9 years that I've been around, they all have a story of how they made their way through their career. And one of them will say, well, I was at a particular conference in 2018, and I was in a corridor, and I was just sitting between sessions, and somebody came over to me and said, you look new. And I had a conversation, and I ended up getting a job with them. And then I went on to something. I mean, the stories are amazing, how people connect with people. And yes, you can't always do it in person, but even on LinkedIn, it's amazing how many of our members are all doing very active things on LinkedIn. So I do encourage everybody to become a member, $16 the first year, $32. We have not raised the student dues for a long time. Don't have any intention of doing so. And then these are some of the benefits, which the gentleman spoke about: making connections, kickstarting your career, keeping informed, having leadership opportunities. Mentoring, just reminder, if you need a mentor, we have a mentor program that matches up mentees with mentors. Anybody in the mentor program? Anybody want a mentor? Lots of opportunities. You can select your mentor based on your industry focus, your technical focus, like you want somebody who's like an expert in like noise or ergonomics. You can find somebody in that domain if you want. Geographic focus, industry focus, I said that already. And I think you can even do like gender focus and things like that. No, we're not changing that. So there's a mapping service that you can match up with a mentor. And okay, I'm not going to cover this. I just want to mention really quickly as we wrap up here, everybody should be familiar with the CIH. So there's another organization called BGC, Board for Global EHS Credentialing. Used to be called ABIH for those that are a little bit more seasoned. You get your CIH, you have to take a rigorous exam. I believe the exam, you have to go to a testing center. It's not yet a virtual exam. So you have to physically go someplace to take the exam. But these are all of the credentials that BGC offers. And this is a slide that talks about the rubrics. So these are the different subject areas that are included in the exam. And then there's some additional information with some hyperlinks on the screen as to how do you best prepare. We actually have a webinar that had been recorded under the additional resources, and it walks you through all the steps to prepare and sit for the CIH exam. And then this slide here talks about all the requirements that you need in order to sit for the exam. This is an ABET accredited school, so you need one less year of experience in order to qualify for the CIH exam. So I think you need 4 instead of 5. Okay. And then very quickly, we did a survey on salaries a year and a half ago, and this is updated every few years. These are starting salaries by region. And then here we have some baseline salaries, if you will, again, by region around the country. So you can see, earning potential is quite good. And then you can see average base pay in different capacities within an organization, what the CIHs are earning, if you will. And then this slide here shows the pay by level of education. So obviously, the more degreed you are, your compensation will go up accordingly. So this is just the median. So there's folks that are above it and there's folks that are below it. A lot of consultants are doing very, very well financially, very, very well. And this is our new strat plan. I'm not even going to talk about this because we're running out of time, but we do have a new strat plan. And you're going to hear more about this if you're a member in the coming weeks, because everything that we do is supportive of this particular plan. And then here very quickly, as I wrap up, these are some of the new things. Now, I've already talked about a lot of these things. So I mentioned the heat stress app, which we're updating for all workers. That will be released this spring. We have a brand new IH calculator app that is web-based. So if you need access to calculations, the formulas that you're going to need for the CIH exam, there's now a web portal where you can plug your variables in and use the platform to come up with your answers. It's a very slick app. The continuous improvement plan is just getting started. That's going to basically take 3 or 4 different initiatives that we've worked on, and it's going to be a roadmap to help you become a better IH. So it's going to take a lot of the knowledge that we've developed over the years in fundamentals of chemical exposure risk assessment and the noise manual and some of the other products that we've developed over the years. And it's all going to be in a very prescriptive plan to help you navigate yourself. A lot of new education that's being developed. I won't get into that at this point. We have that CDC grant I mentioned earlier. I am a member of the Commission on Climate and Workforce Health. It's sponsored by another organization. And the purpose of this commission is to address the impact of high temperatures on workers. It's getting AIHA a lot of visibility because, again, we have the app and we have a whole separate program called Grand Challenges that I'm not going to get into, but one of our grand challenges as a profession is protecting workers from high temperature, whether you're indoors or outdoors. And so we're going to be leveraging the commission to advance that particular project. A lot of good work that's being done with our lab accreditation program. We have new accreditation programs that are launching. We have new PAT programs that are launching. I mentioned AI and what's happening with that, with content priorities. We have a lot of memorandums of understanding with third-party organizations. We've got about 20 of them now, including ASHRAE, which is a big deal because ASHRAE never really wanted to talk to us, but now we're in bed with them. And they recognize that the actual occupant of the building is just as important as the energy savings in the building. So they're starting to dialogue with us. I talked about EPA earlier and our work with them. The wheels. So we used to have something called the wheels, which is like a TLV. And we're now bringing the wheels back to AIHA. Long story short, we had it. We gave it away in 2013. The company that was managing it decided they didn't want to do it anymore. We're bringing it back. Long story short, though, we're calling it something different. It's going to be called the AIHA OEL program. And that literally is just getting started. And then finally, we have a new lab sampling flyer. This is a flyer that helps you understand the importance of having qualified IH support doing the sampling. Because a lot of our lab customers out there are saying that the quality of the samples is not good. And so we decided to develop this flyer to help educate clients, companies that are doing sampling, make sure you have the right individual that's doing the sampling and submitting that sample to the lab, because it's garbage in, garbage out otherwise. Okay, I'm done. A lot of good information. Again, I covered a lot very quickly, but I thank you all very much for your time, and I think we'll open it up for a couple minutes of Q&A if there is. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And here's my contact information in case anybody has any questions. If you want to email me afterwards. Comments, questions? Yes?
You mentioned earlier, you talked about emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is something that's kind of lacking in like academic training and academia kind of like as a whole.
Yeah.
So I recently took an like emotional intelligence course.
Yeah.
It was made for like C-suite executives.
Yeah.
Has AIHA thought about doing anything for emotional intelligence to improve like leadership quality for IA professionals?
So we have put on webinars over the last several years on EI, and I have done EI presentations at chapters that I visited. I would be happy to come back up here and do an EI, an intro to EI. There's probably more that we can do as an organization. We don't have anything, formally planned, but I will tell you that when we do leadership training, for example, when we bring the leaders of our volunteer groups together and our local sections together, we typically do something in EI, but that's, specific throughout the year. But one of the things if you want to email me, I can send you a link to that webinar that was developed a little while ago. You might learn something out of it. You might have already gotten fundamentals from the course you took. But I think that there is certainly a tie-in between, EI and how you lead a working group or a task force. It's interesting. I was driving up here and I got a call from somebody who was all upset. Some of our volunteer groups have their own awards. And each year the volunteer group will go through a process of naming somebody who they feel is worthy of getting that award. Like, for example, Women in IH is one of our committees. We're not canceling that. And so they have their own award. And so apparently there was a little bit of a kerfuffle in the process. And I guess they decided not to award it this year for whatever reason. And I started thinking about EI and like, how are those conversations being maintained to get to that point where they couldn't decide to give that particular award out this year? So I think it is a constant evolving body of work and how we communicate to our members that EI is a very important thing. The concepts are not hard to understand. The challenge I always say is when you need to use it. So when you're being confronted with some negative feedback from somebody, or there's a very adversarial conversation, your gut reaction is to immediately react, say something you probably shouldn't have said. EI is about controlling the emotions that are bubbling up within you. I've used it many, many times. Used it with board members. I've used it with members. Some of the members do irritate me. It's a few. It's a few. So it's a good question. Anything else?
Class is lining up.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. Thank you again. Appreciate it.